This video is going to be a review of Unit 2, Topic 1, Features of Functions. We're going to go through each of the problems in this packet starting at the beginning, and if you want to scroll through to find later questions, you can use this video as you wish. You can check all of the questions or you can just check some of them. So we're going to begin here. Use the graphs of f of x and g of x to answer number 1. As you can see, f of x is this graph here, it's a connected line, and g of x here is a series of dots. Check the boxes for the function that has the characteristic described. It begins, the values of the range are continuous. Continuous means connected. So we're going to select the graph that is a connected line. That is f of x, and not g of x, because g of x is separated dots. The next question says the values of the range are discrete. Discrete means separate dots. So for this one, we are going to choose g of x because it is separated, not f of x because it is connected. The next problem says the domain of the function is continuous from 0 to 7. What these mean right here is that x is a value between 0 and 7, and it's all of the values in between, including decimals and fractions. So anytime that you see this sort of notation with inequalities, we're always talking about a continuous function. So g of x is already out of the running. F of x, we just need to check to see if the domain, the x values, go from 0 to 7. So we begin here at 0, that is our lowest value, 7 is our highest value, and yes, f of x is the correct graph for this function. All right, for the next one, the domain of the function is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I made a mistake. I meant to type 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I meant for it to match this function. If it was just 0 through 5, that would be the correct domain for this function because the inputs are at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with no decimal points or fractions in between. However, I accidentally put a 6. So you have two options. One is you can cross this off and then select g of x, or you could just select neither of them because 6 is not part of this graph and this would not be a discrete domain anyway. Moving on, the function has no x-intercept. An x-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis. So as we look along our x-axis, f of x does not cross and g of x does not cross either. So this would be both f of x and g of x because neither function crosses the x-axis. Next, the value of the y-intercept is 1. This is where our graph crosses the y-axis. You can see here that f of x crosses the y-axis here at 1, so that would be yes for f of x. And here, g of x crosses the y-axis at 2, so no, not g of x. The function increases for the entire domain. Remember that we read a function from left to right like we read a book, and increasing would mean that it's going up as we read it from left to right. The entire domain means all of the x values of the function, so the whole function is increasing the whole time. F of x, as you can see here, does increase for the whole entire domain, whereas g of x increases for this part of the domain from 0 to 3, but then from 3 to 5, it begins decreasing. So g of x is not correct for this one. So f of x is yes, and g of x is no. The next one says, the function decreases for the entire domain. Well, we already established that f of x is increasing the whole time, and that g of x is partially increasing and partially decreasing. So neither of these functions would be selected. I'm going to leave this here so you can pause the video if you need to, but we're moving on to page 2. Number 2 asks, for which intervals is the graph below increasing? When you look at this graph, you'll notice that this part is increasing from left to right. This part is decreasing. This part is flat. And then once again, it is decreasing. So when you consider this, the portion of this graph that is increasing is, whoops, hit the tripod, is from here to here. So the x values, when my graph is increasing, my increasing interval is from -3 to -1. So I select A. We're going to use the functions h of x and k of x to answer numbers 3 through 5. H of x is a table of values. You have your inputs here and your outputs here. K of x is an equation where you would plug in your input for x to find the output. Number 3 asks us to evaluate h of 1 plus k of 2 and show how you know. This means that we need to show the value of h of 1, show the value of k of 2, show any work we did, if we did work to find this, and go from there. So h of 1, we will go to our h table, and inputs are in parentheses, so we need to go to our x value of 1, because that is our input. When the x value is 1, the output is -2. And that's all I really need to do to show my work for this. Now I'll bring in plus, and k of 2, I'm going to take this function here, and instead of x, I will plug in 2. So k of 2 equals 4 times, instead of x, now I'll put 2 plus 6. So k of 2 equals 8 plus 6. K of 2 equals 14. So now that I've shown my work, I'm going to do -2 plus 14, which is 12, and that's my answer. We are now going to move on to number 4. Number 4 is going to require us to use the table on the previous page, and so is number 5. So we're still referencing these two, this function h of x and this function k of x for number 4. So number 4 asks us to evaluate h of -2 times k of -3. So we'll begin by finding h of -2 in the table. H of -2, when the input is -2, the output is 5. Be careful, you don't want to work backwards. That's an output. The input -2 gives an output of 5. So h of -2 is 5. Times k of -3. We're going to do the same thing we did for the last problem. We're going to take this equation and plug in -3 for x. So 4 times -3 plus 6. So we have to evaluate all of this first before we can multiply by 5. So 4 times -3 is -12 plus 6. We're going to do all of this first. And now it's 5 times -12 plus 6 is -6. And 5 times -6 is -30. Moving on. For what value of x is h of x equal to -2? This is the reverse of h of -2 because this is my input. I don't know the input. They want me to find the input. This is my output. So I'm going to look for an output of -2 on my table and find what the input was. On my table, when the output was -2, the input was 1. Okay, number 6. We're going to use the graphs of m of x and p of x to answer numbers 6 through 8. You can see m of x is this line right here, and p of x is this line right here. Number 6 says, which correctly models the range, that's all of our y values from least to greatest, of p of x. So here's my graph for p of x. My lowest y value is here at 2, and my highest y value for p of x is 6. So I'll need to choose the inequality that shows all of the values from 2 to 6, because those are the y values for p of x. So the correct answer is C. Number 7 has several parts. We need to fill each of these in with less than, greater than, or equal to. For the values of 0 to 2.2, so when the x values are between 0 and 2.2, is m of x greater than, less than, or equal to p of x. So when we see 0 to 2.2 on our graph, that's this section right here. That's all the way up until we get to this intersection. So when you're asking yourself which one is greater or less, you will consider which one is above and which one is below. So you can see p of x is here above m of x. And since m of x is underneath from 0 to 2.2, we're going to say that m of x is less than p of x because it's below it. Next, the y-intercept of m of x, and then we'll say it's greater than or less than the y-intercept of p of x. This one you can kind of do intuitively, or you can write the actual values, but the y-intercept of m of x is at 0 because m of x crosses the y-axis at 0. And the y-intercept of p of x is here at 6. So the y-intercept of m of x is less than the y-intercept of p of x because we're comparing 0 to 6. When x equals 2, m of x blank p of x. So when x equals 2, m of x has an output of 4. And when x equals 2, p of x is up here at about 4.9 maybe. So p of x is greater than m of x at this point. You can also just see it's above it. So that's another one where p of x is greater than m of x. Okay, m of 3 blank p of 0. M of 3 is 6. Because when the input is 3, the output is 6. Whoops. M of 3 is 6 because when the input is 3, the output on this graph is 6. And p of 0 is also 6. So these values are equal because m of 3 is 6 and p of 0 is 6. All right, one last question here. What is the value of the x-intercept of m of x? So this function m of x crosses the x-axis right here, which is at 0. On to the back. 3 relations are shown below, A, B, and C. Which mathematical relation is not a function? Explain why the elements of the domain and range do not meet the definition of a function. So we're going to check to see which function has multiple outputs for a single input, because that would mean that it is not a function. Each input on this mapping diagram only has one line coming out of it, so this is a function. Here we have a graph, so we can use our vertical line test, and it looks like the input of 3 here has 2 different outputs, so this is not a function. And just to be safe in case there are multiple ones, we're going to check the last one too. Our inputs are 1, 2, 3, and 4. That one is a function. None of the inputs repeat, so none of them would go to 2 different y values. So which mathematical relation is not a function? We would say B is not a function because the input 3 has 2 outputs. And if you want to be really specific, we can say what they are. That would be 3 and 5. All right, almost done. Use the information to answer number 10 and 11. Oh no, a zombie apocalypse has started in our school. Yikes. The number of infected students is a function of time. The number of infected students, Z of H, after each hour H, so our input is hours and our output is the number of zombie students, is given by the function z of h equals 2 times 4 to the power of h. So this is an exponential expression, or an exponential equation rather. Determine the value of z of 5. Show how you know. So this is checking our knowledge of function notation. So we need to take the input 5 and plug it into the variable part of our function. So this will be 2 times 4 to the 5th power. So we can take our calculator and you will type 2 times 4 to the 5th power, just like that. And so the answer is 2048. And since that's an output, we're going to say zombie students to show that we know what we're talking about. And our last problem. What does z of 7 equals 4802 mean in the context of this problem? So this is my input, and this is my output. So the input is h, and h stands for hours. It tells us right here. My output is 4,802, which is z of h, and that is our number of infected students. So what this whole thing means is after 7 hours, because that's our input, 4,802 students have become zombies. To correctly answer this question, you'll have to talk about the input and the output and be able to describe what each of them means. So the input part is 7 hours, and the output part is what has happened after 7 hours. All right, that does it for this video going through all of the Unit 2 Topic 1 quiz review. Please go back and review anything that you think that you still need help with, and I hope you found this video helpful.